Dr. the Honorable Keith Rowley and Mrs. Rowley, Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, the Honorable Mr. Justice Ivor Archie, ORTT, and Mrs. Archie, CARICOM heads of state and heads of government, Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa and Dr. Bisesa, the Honorable Orville London, Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, other cabinet ministers, members of the diplomatic corps, members of the judiciary, Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, Prime Minister and dear friend, and we all feel your intense sense of grief. I guess it is more so given the fact that the Honorable Prime Minister, yourself and I, we all are graduates of Mona, Jamaica. Mrs. Hazel Manning, Brian, David, Dr. Petronella, sisters and members of the family, the Manning family and circle, all of the specially invited guests, good morning to all. The cup runneth over, and justifiably so, for a man who in the saddle of that bucking horse called politics experienced its flotsam and jetsam, the taxing vagaries of representing the people for some 44 years in the Parliament, the region, and on the world stage. It is not easy to live in a country where patience is sometimes thin. Memory is short. And everything must be made instant like coffee. A society where there are gods, men and women who make no errors and countenance none, where compassion, kindness, mercy, forgiveness, and mediation are expendables on the altar of political expediency and pragmatism. We are experiencing a tremendous outpouring of genuine love and adoration for a true statesman with a formidable legacy embedded in our historical, political, and national landscape. Patrick Augustus Mervyn Manning executed his responsibilities as a servant of the people with genuine love and concern for the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and its people. There is a well-grounded and agreed consensus that he engaged in visionary and pioneering work in the oil and gas industry that led to the monetization of our natural gas reserves, infrastructural development that literally changed the face of our capital city, Port of Spain, civil aviation, political and social reform, and education, catapulting our country closer to the attainment of developed nation status. We must also be comforted in the fact that his reach was not confined to the economic and social development of Trinidad and Tobago. This is why, Mrs. Manning and the rest of the family, people across the region have reacted with so much passion and so much sadness at his passing. We have witnessed this through, for example, the observance of 2 days of national mourning on Thursday and Friday in our sister CARICOM state of Dominica. Patrick Manning was not a Caribbean armchair integrationist. His commitment to the unfinished business of the full integration of the region should be documented for posterity. This should be compulsory reading for future leaders, in whose hands we would inevitably pass the baton, and who must seek to build on his unfinished work. He was bold enough to champion the cause of regional integration wherever he went and at whatever forum he spoke. I can recall in one of his addresses to the United Nations General Assembly, he advanced that Trinidad and Tobago, within its limited means, continues to recognize the importance of building a Caribbean civilization based on the common history we share with our neighbors. He went on to postulate that Trinidad and Tobago was determined that no member of our Caribbean family must be left behind as the region seeks to maximize the benefits of the CSME in order to provide a better way of life for all our peoples. He was committed in his quest to contribute to the building of a modern Caribbean civilization in more ways than one. Indeed, I also recall the importance he attached to the energy security of CARICOM through the work of the Regional Energy Security Task Force. Part and parcel of this was the goal of the creation of an energy LNG pipeline linking Trinidad and Tobago and countries in the Eastern Caribbean, because he was aware of the importance of reasonably priced energy to the development of the nascent economies of CARICOM countries. Mr. Manning further explained, and I quote, "These arrangements hold out a promise of a reduction of 30% in energy costs, including electricity, and would guarantee these countries price stability and predictability over the medium to long term," end of quote. Here we observe that while some are only writing or articulating on what regionalism should be, or engaging in sheer rhetoric on the subject, Patrick Manning was about devising solutions to help foster this Caribbean civilization of which I speak. This was a testament of this quintessential Caribbean man at work, ensuring the economic well-being of not just Trinidad and Tobago, but the entire Caribbean region. You see, ladies and gentlemen, it was never meant to be a Trinidad and Tobago thing, but always about regional empowerment, collectively and individually disbursed. His attempts to jumpstart a genuine Caribbean integration movement and vitiate implementation deficits he encountered, because many decisions and communique of CARICOM meetings suffer from a lack of operationalization. It was indeed, and it will be indeed, a committed gesture up to his legacy if all the prime ministers and the presidents of this region resuscitate the CARICOM and the Caribbean integration movement charted by Mr. Manning's vision of the Caribbean as being one, as being a potent force on the world stage. His love for Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean was unmistakable. We, however, would be incomplete in our assessment of this veteran political leader and former Prime Minister if we do not recognize that he was also an internationalist. Yes, in Cuba we would call him an internationalista. This must be seen, not be seen solely in the context of bringing to the shores of our beloved republic leaders from diverse corners of the globe, through the hosting in 1 year, 2009, of the Summit of the Americas, or the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, SHOGA. It must also be seen through the lens of his African Oil Initiative. And here I'm referring to his initial work with the Ghanaian authorities to assist that country to develop its infant hydrocarbon industry. He saw Trinidad and Tobago playing an important role based on the experience of over a century of involvement in the oil industry to aid African countries in this area of development. It is therefore fitting tribute that his work in this area continues to engage the astute intention and attention of the government and people of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Manning established strong diplomatic ties on behalf of TNT globally, and many world leaders spoke very highly of him and his vision. I do recall when I visited South Africa to address an African Union summit sometime last year. I met several presidents and former presidents of that great continent. President Zuma, President Mugabe, and the presidents of Ghana, Zambia, and Uganda. And they all asked, "How is my dear friend Patrick?" And before I could respond, they all genuinely sang his praises, his acumen, his vision. And as president, I experienced great national pride, and it made me feel good inside. Mr. Manning was the consummate public servant, and he was a workaholic, but in an enjoyable way. Do you know he read every single piece of correspondence that came before him, especially from the public, in all forms? And they, his staff, were amazed and amused that he will put instructions on even a piece of small paper, small as or even smaller than a call card. He would be given large containers of work only to receive it bright and early next morning. Every piece of correspondence read and instructions written on them. His was a phenomenal work ethic, which we need to emulate if we are serious about engaging productivity levels in this country of ours. I was told he never took a vacation. However, when those who worked with him in the office applied for vacation, his forehead would immediately wrinkle, and he would say, "When you come back from a long vacation, you will forget how to work. So just take 5 days now." Mrs. Hazel Manning, the wife of our former Prime Minister, referenced a quote by Nelson Henderson on Tuesday last at the Legacy Series celebration of her husband's life, hosted by our alma mater, Presentation College San Fernando, in the auditorium. At that function, Mrs. Manning, you inspired us all in spite of your grief by referencing these words of magic, and I quote, that the true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit, end of quote. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the philosophy Mr. Manning lived by and executed in no uncertain manner. The Chronic Disease Assistance Program, CDAP, the Government Assistance for Tuition Expenses Program, GATE, and the University of Trinidad and Tobago were his brain children and trees that he planted to secure the future of Trinidad and Tobago. And we have not come to terms with this reality as yet. But the University of Trinidad and Tobago, the UTT, has provided both the intellectual and practical impetus for economic diversification that we seek through innovation and invention. His foresight for a greater, better, and economically viable Trinidad and Tobago is undeniable. Monsignor Christian Pereira, Vicar General of the Catholic Diocese, at that same memorial hosted by Presentation College San Fernando last Tuesday, spoke in so many words of the need to live in our lives today the good things we say about people at the time of their death and funeral. It was indeed a clarion call to the ascendancy of the affirmative spirit that lies within all of us to rise in glory. We must continue after this funeral, after this ceremony of celebration in our daily lives to have beautiful thoughts and hopes, and invariably it would transform the way we see each other and the way we treat each other. And this is not utopic if we simply try to be nice to each other. Today, penultimately, we bid farewell to a dynamo of change, a champion of democracy, and an era in the political landscape of this great republic. To Mrs. Hazel Manning, sons Brian, and Brian, I don't know how you're coping, only arriving yesterday, having to take all these exams while your father has gone on to the beyond. And David, I think it must have been, in fact, your DNA, because in fact you and your mom and your brother, you all come from a proud race of people whose DNA was one of struggle and foresight and independence. And I speak of the legacy of the Americans. And I have to thank you all on behalf of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and all the rest of the family tree for giving us a true Caribbean man, a patriot, a visionary, and a statesman. And in your moment of deep grief, I urge you all to invoke the power of prayer and the power of God to give solace to your aching hearts and seek comfort in the fact that Patrick Augustus Mervyn Manning lived a fulfilling life, and he left this world a better place than he met it. Thank you.
Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, delivering